Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Recovery Support Services ECHO series. This is a program brought to you by the Center for Substance Use Training and Telementoring CSAT, a division of the Be Well Institute here at UT Health San Antonio. My name is Andrea, and I will help to facilitate this conversation today. Please note that this session is being recorded for later distribution. However, the information listed on the chat will not appear on the recordings. If you need captionings for this class, please navigate to the bottom part of your Zoom windows and click on the captioning features. To help us with attendance, please start adding your names, email addresses, and organizations on the chat. If you're joining via phone, please send us an email at bewelltexas@utesca.edu so we can associate your phone numbers with your names. And in today's class, as always, we're starting with a 25 minutes didactic presentation, followed by your questions, and then we're moving to our case discussion. This is a case presented by someone from our community of learners, by one of you, and this is where we really would like to hear your perspectives, your ideas. We want to hear your voices, so please just unmute yourselves and take part of this conversation. These sessions are made for you, the learners. One thing we ask from you, if possible, please raise your hands and wait until we call your names before unmuting your microphones. That way we'll have a fluid, organized, and great conversation, and all of us will have the opportunity to participate as well. And with that, we're going to start with some introductions from the RSS Hub, and we are starting with Richard Hamner. If you could please introduce yourself to the group, please.
Hello, hello everyone. Sorry, Richard Hamner, Be Well Texas, and I'm one of the hub members with the Recovery Support Services Program Manager, and glad you're here.
Thank you, Richard. Susan Walker, could you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you. I'm Susan Walker. I'm with Faces and Voices of Recovery, and I am very privileged to be a member of the Hub team as well.
Thank you. Well, happy to have you as well. And our case presenter of the day, Kelly, would you introduce yourself to the group, please?
Sure. My name is Kelly Wilson Olvera. I'm a recovery support peer specialist, and I'm also the executive assistant of the Center for Recovery and Wellness Resources.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Happy to see you here.
Thank you.
And
so
Jasmine
much.
Vidal.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jasmine Vidal, and I'm the RSS ECHO coordinator. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy today's session.
Thank you. And now we're moving to our speaker of the day. We have again Phil Owens. Phil, it's nice to see you again at our series. Welcome, and I think we can start sharing your PowerPoint didactics, and if you want to start with your presentation.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm Phil Owen. I am a program director at Communities for Recovery. I am also a person in long-term recovery, an overdose survivor, and a parent that lost his child to a fentanyl poisoning event. Thank you for having me today. If I can share my screen correctly. Does everybody see? I think we're okay.
Yes, we see it. Perfect.
All right, thank you so much. So I was asked to present some content around recovery messaging. So today's presentation is Empowering Recovery, Effective Messaging in Recovery Support Services. A few disclosures is all speakers and all members of the planning committee have no relevant financial relationships with a commercial interest to disclose. The views and opinions expressed by the participants and the speakers attending the ECHO sessions are solely their opinions and do not reflect the official position of policy of UT Health San Antonio. So once again, I want to thank everybody for giving me this opportunity to share with you what I've learned about recovery messaging and what I consider to be one of the most valuable skills that we can develop, which is empowering others with the language that we use. This brought me to the title of Empowering Recovery, Effective Messaging and Recovery Support Services. The goal of this workshop is to equip participants with tools and strategies for delivering clear, supportive, and impactful communication in recovery support services. Our 3 learning objectives for this presentation are going to be to identify key elements of effective recovery messaging, to implement recovery messaging in peer support services, and to create a clear understanding of peer positioning to evaluate and adjust our messaging for diverse audiences. So as we begin to talk about recovery messaging, it's important to reflect on our peer support principles, our recovery principles. And as we go through these, we look at recovery-oriented approaches which emphasize healing, personal growth, long-term well-being, the principle of it being voluntary, which refers to actions taken by choice or free will, relationship-focused approaches that prioritize building and maintaining personal connections and understanding, which also introduces a trauma-informed approach, which is sensitive to the impact of trauma and seeks to provide support that avoids re-traumatization. Those 4 principles are supported through SAMHSA's peer support principles. In Texas, the core curriculum introduced 2 others that I think are equally as important. Self-determination, which is part of the SAMHSA definition of recovery, is that we support self-determination, which emphasizes an individual's autonomy and the ability to make their own choices. Sometimes what comes alongside that is risk and our ability to support the dignity of risk, which recognizes the right of individuals to make choices that involve some level of risk, acknowledging that these choices are part of living a full and autonomous life. To build on that and to provide a deeper understanding of our peer support principles, I thought it might be helpful if we looked at what were the opposites, an understanding through the opposites of peer support principles. So when we look at the problem focus, which concentrates more on managing or controlling symptoms without necessarily prioritizing the individual. Mandatory or enforced. Mandatory refers to actions that are required or enforced. Transactional, which focuses on functional aspects of interactions without necessarily prioritizing the interpersonal relationships involved. We must remember that we are relationship focused. And once again, that is the core of what we do, and it is one of our peer support principles. Also, trauma unaware, the opposite of trauma informed. To be trauma unaware, this approach may fail to recognize or address the effects of trauma. It potentially leads to practices that could inadvertently cause harm or re-traumatize individuals. Coercion, the opposite of self-determination, refers to situations where decisions are made by others or under external pressure, limiting or removing the individual's ability to direct their own life. The opposite of dignity of risk is risk aversion or paternalism. Risk aversion refers to the approach that prioritizes safety and protection over individual autonomy, often by restricting or controlling choices to minimize risk and denies a person their full autonomy. We would be remiss to talk about recovery messaging if we didn't discuss stigma, because stigma shows up in many ways, such as perpetuating the idea that substance use issues are moral failings. They can discourage help seeking. Stigma can prevent individuals from seeking treatment due to fear of being judged, labeled, or discriminated against, which can exacerbate addiction and delay recovery. Isolation. Stigmatized individuals may feel isolated or marginalized, which can negatively impact their self-esteem and mental health, ultimately hindering their recovery process. Stigma also reinforces stereotypes. Poorly crafted recovery messaging that focuses too much on negative aspects of addiction may reinforce harmful stereotypes, such as portraying individuals in recovery as failures or outcasts, which can just perpetuate the revolving door of stigma. This also, language has impact on policy and funding. Stigma can also affect how resources are allocated to recovery efforts. If addiction is viewed primarily through a lens of moral failing rather than a health issue, it can limit funding or support for treatment and recovery programs, right? We have to put it in terms of getting down to the bottom dollar sometimes. So balancing the need to address stigma while promoting recovery in a compassionate, non-judgmental way is essential for effective recovery-oriented messaging. So language has power to transform not only the individual self-perception, but also the way society and communities support recovery, encouraging a more compassionate, hopeful, and inclusive approach. It encourages help-seeking, positive recovery messaging, reduces the fear of judgment, and can encourage individuals with addiction to seek treatment. It frames recovery as a brave, empowering choice, helping support people in a way that is supportive and to initiate those first steps. It builds hope and resilience, recovery messaging that highlights success stories and emphasizes that recovery is possible can inspire hope. It reassures individuals that despite setbacks, they can achieve fulfilling, healthy life free from addiction or other struggles that they may see as goals. Promotes community support. The positive messaging fosters a sense of community and solidarity, encouraging those in recovery to connect with support networks such as peer groups, friends, family, or professional organizations. This can help create nurturing environment that strengthens recovery. It improves self-awareness. It improves public awareness. Recovery messaging raises awareness around the complexities of addiction or substance use and the importance of the support systems, treatment, and understanding. It can help shift public perception from seeing addiction or substance use as a moral failing to viewing it as a treatable health issue. Once again, it encourages policy and funding support. Positive recovery messaging that highlights the success of recovery programs can lead to increased public and political support. It results in better funding for treatment facilities, education, and harm reduction strategies. Effective recovery messaging can reshape perceptions, reduce barriers to treatment, and create a more supportive environment for individuals seeking recovery. So storytelling or story sharing. We may be familiar with the idea of storytelling, as many of us may have been asked to tell our story as a way of communicating that recovery offers hope and is possible. In most cases, this is a great opportunity to reflect on things that we have done to overcome and to demonstrate resilience. Story sharing recognizes the need for a mutual space. Story sharing is centered on engagement and supports shared lived experience, as well as exploring aspects of each other's journey that may be unfamiliar. It's an exchange of experiences to better understand one's unique journey. Peer positioning. So peer positioning is kind of a more peer-centered, person with lived experience-centered view of what may be familiar as spectrums of attitudes. However, peer positioning is an important aspect of why we say things a certain way and how it's received. How we see ourselves being the best possible benefit to a person being served is best determined by that person. So this introduces a new aspect that the spectrums of attitudes didn't cover. There may be many reasons where a person prefers the peer specialist to be positioned. One's culture, confidence, relationships, challenges, and successes may all be considerations in a person's preferences. So we're going to discuss peer positioning, and what I mean by that, we're going to introduce a new concept to where we position ourselves in those relationships. In front of means where we are from a perspective of as a mentor, as a coach. There are times where we may be asked to be in a position of mentoring or leading as the person that we are working with is unfamiliar with the process or a task they want to complete. An example of that might be role modeling advocacy for someone until they gain the confidence to advocate for themselves. For example, maybe in a physician's office to where they've always been told that they are drug seeking or doctor shopping, but to learn to advocate for oneself in a way that they are self-advocating for their personal needs, their medical needs, their healthcare needs. Another way that we might be in front of, we might have our peer position in front of, is if we're being asked, what would you do in my situation? In those examples, we are in front of, we may be from the perspective of being a mentor or being a coach, letting someone know what we did in that position. These examples might show a need to be in front of. Always remember that informed consent is a must when aligning peer support principles with the position of being in front of, right? We always want to ask, for clarity, do you want me to tell you what I would do? Are you asking me, you want my opinion? Informed consent is key when we're honoring those peer principles and having positive recovery messaging. So next to is probably the peer position that most people are familiar with or you hear talked about the most. Next to means side by side, as in a supportive role. Coaching or mentoring, maybe being in front of, I would say falls into more of the helpful, where we're being more helpful than just supportive, whereas peer positioning in the side-by-side role is being more supporting, to do with. This is probably the most familiar position as it demonstrates not doing for, but rather doing with. Self-determination supports a person's ability to make choices for themselves. After all, we all make mistakes, regardless of one's recovery date or recovery capital. So to introduce a newer concept, or one that isn't in the trainings that I've been in or in the supervision that I've been in the past, is the concept of being led. I think sometimes because we may be further along in our recovery journey, or because we've entered a field where we have a certification or some training towards a certification, that we consider that we should be in front of, or at best side by side. I'm going to ask you to consider the position of being led. Being led is positioning ourselves in a way that allows the person being served to guide us in a way that we can gain understanding of that person's situation. It supports diverse lived and living experiences. But let's keep in mind that one's recovery might not consider substances or mental health as their primary recovery component. So placing ourselves in a learner position helps us to better understand the person being served in a way that places them in the driver's seat or the teaching position. Recovery messaging is not expected to be prescriptive or to come from a position of expertise, but rather a perspective that explores the other through a lens of empathy and willingness to better understand the person being served. And remember, understanding someone's unique journey saves us the risk of making assumptions. It relies on the power of trust in knowing that the person who knows best is the person that is being served, and that they are empowered and supported through self-determination, even when risks seem inevitable. So different words have different meanings to different people. For this reason, we don't all react with the same response when we hear certain words. Some words may trigger certain responses due to the unique experiences that a person has. For example, the word recovery may seem positive to most, but for some people, it might produce a negative response. Rather than judging or assuming, recovery language should honor the principles mentioned earlier and come from a place of respect and understanding. Recovery might seem impossible or unreasonable to some. Recovery or sober clean dates may represent a barrier or perceived failure to some. So what are some ways that we can reframe the word recovery? We can do this by introducing other words that may be more acceptable to the person being served. Healing or surviving. If you were asked, if you knew someone was suffering, would you support them in stabilizing their suffering? Even if you knew suffering would continue. Self-determination and dignity of risk are highlighted in this concept because there are inherent risks with people's choices. So we can't have recovery messaging that is a one-size-fits-all because recovery isn't a one-size-fits-all concept. Little quote from SAMHSA, recovery messaging is most effective when it emphasizes the hope and possibility of recovery, acknowledges that recovery looks different for everyone, and includes people with lived experience as authentic voices to share their stories. From Faces and Voices, personal stories of recovery are among the most powerful tools in changing public perceptions and encouraging individuals in the midst of addiction to seek help. And lastly, from the Recovery Research Institute, effective recovery messaging can challenge stigma by showing people can and do recover, which in turn can reduce public fear and negative attitudes towards people with substance use disorders. Thank you guys for listening to this presentation and for allowing me to introduce my concept of recovery messaging.
Thank you, Phil. And we're opening the floor for questions. I see some accolades on the screens. Steven, did you enjoy the presentation? You may unmute yourself if you wish.
Well, I unmuted myself, so this is Richard. Phil, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I thought, what a great job, because I think you started out just really with our basics, but when you moved into peer positioning and reframing recovery, that was extremely meaningful. And I don't think I've really looked at the peer positioning as much. Maybe others have, but when you've said that, I thought that was fantastic. When you talked about reframing recovery, you gave those definitions, but I guess from RRI and some of the others. What are some other examples where we can maybe of what that looks like when you talk about reframing recovery?
Well, I think one is that reframing our understanding of lived experience as well, right? Because we're in a field where our qualification for certification says that our lived experience with mental health and substance use is what qualifies us for those positions or for those certifications. And I think we need a deeper understanding and a broadening understanding of what recovery might be. Someone's harm reduction or someone's continued substance use might be part of their recovery if the recovery is primarily from being human trafficked, having experienced being a survivor of domestic violence. We need to, at one time when I came into recovery, it was all about abstinence or use, and it was very black and white, and we've introduced a world of grays that has been really helpful to where you have an understanding of what risk reduction might be and what harm reduction might be. And just for clarity, to give an example of risk reduction and harm reduction, risk reduction would be if it's a hot day out and it's sunny, is that I don't go outside. I avoid that risk by staying inside. Harm reduction would be if I know I'm going to go outside, that I wear a cap, I put on sunscreen, and I take a bottle of water with me. So the more shades of gray that we can introduce into our understandings of what someone's recovery might be based around and how they might prioritize those layers of their personal onion and what they might identify the most strongly is, I think we better shape this into more of a wellness model and a human model that truly understands people at a deeper level.
Beautiful.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Phil.
Great
Thank
example.
you. Yes. Tanya, I think you wanted to say something.
Yes. First of all, great didactic. I love it. As a woman in recovery, I've been sober a little under 20 years. And so when I came into the program, 12-step, that was it. It was all or nothing. You're using or you're not. Folks who had gained 700 days of sobriety use one day, and then that's it. Your 700 days are gone. And I always thought that was just kind of the most sort of demoralizing way in which to view it. When I got into MAT and harm reduction, I realized that one of the reasons why I became abstinent from my substance of abuse was not because of the drug, it was because of the consequences. So when I deal with my clients, I ask them what their goal is, because some of their drug use is not consequential to them. And so we don't need to address that. I want to address what's causing you consequences. So the idea that someone will say, I tried benzodiazepines, I don't like it, so I smoke cannabis for my anxiety. Great, if that is not causing you consequence. And so I love this whole harm reduction approach. I think the only concern I have with 12-step being a wonderful model, don't get me wrong, I love 12-step, but the problem I have is it being in MAT. I have to direct people to page 133 because they miss the whole point, because Bill W. speaks about seeing psychiatrists, medication interventions. Please do not disregard their services. And yet you'll go into a meeting and they'll say, hey, I've had actual clients tell me my sponsor dropped me when she found out I was on Suboxone or I was on methadone. Which is just debilitating to some of these folks. And so I just, I love the harm reduction. I love the facts that I can look at your consequences and not your drug use, because that's not the issue. The issue is what's consequencing you. So I love that harm reduction approach. And so I just appreciate RSS really pushing the fact that abstinence is not the only way to recover. And we're not all recovering from the same thing. And to address what we're recovering from, not a drug that I think you should be recovering from, when really it's not causing you any problems. It actually might be helping you. So I super appreciate this approach, and I just wanted to kind of put that out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom. I just wanted to piggyback on that too. It's also one thing to keep in mind is Bill W. was a participant in early MAT clinical trials for LSD for alcohol use disorder. And there, if you read any of the notes that he left about that, they were not negative.
Lindsay, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. So I just, wanted to say that I really appreciate everything you were saying, Phil. And as a person in long-term recovery who uses drugs, I'm very I get a lot of pushback sometimes on, well, you can't be in recovery and use drugs, but for me, that's simply not the case. I'm in recovery from the chaotic substance use that I used to be in, as opposed to having a life and a family and a job and all of these other things, and also using substances. So it really can be separate, right? And it doesn't have to, one thing doesn't always have to lead to the other. So the substance use doesn't always have to be chaotic. It can be a multitude of things. And I think that we're just now starting to really acknowledge that, right? And see it and be able to talk about it. And I think it's a wonderful thing.
And for some people, it might be the very thing that allows them to sustain survival, right? It might be what they're using to cope with something else. And also that, for states that have medical marijuana is used as a medical modality for substance use treatment. So, when we change our social concepts around what's acceptable, we save lives. And to me, it's if we can take the motto of whatever it takes, I think ultimately we are saving lives.
Gilbert, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm Gilbert from El Paso, Texas. And so I'm a chairperson of a program called MARA. Hope some of y'all have heard about it. Hope everyone's heard about it. It's a medication assisted recovery anonymous. And for me, it is the answer for Matt. Anybody on Matt should be, I would very highly recommend that you would invite them to a program. You can get them online. Here in El Paso, we have one on Tuesdays from 12 to 1. And I'm going to start putting that one online also. But the thing about Matt is just like the answer when people went to NA, when let's just say people who are on substances were invited to AA meetings, but they weren't wholly accepted. Matt is just an evolution of that. And I think it's a beautiful program because Matt allows us the time to heal. But at the MARA program, it allows me to have the space to heal. And so I just highly recommend everybody, check out that program. We have it's growing. MARA. It's growing in Texas. It's growing throughout our states. And so rather than, I'm just directing you to get on the website and find out where a MARA program is closest to you or get online. They're all over the place every single day. There's a MARA meeting going on. It's a great place the same things we're talking about, it's right there. It's a great program. Here at our center at Santa Ramos, we pick up people from the rehab centers who are in MAT, and every group I've had, they're really close, especially the young people. They are truly close in the program, and they get to talk about things that they cannot talk about at NA meetings. The space is wide open for them. So that's all I want to say on that matter. MARA, MARA, Medication Assisted Recovery Anonymous. I'm all in.
Thank you, Gilbert. And I think we're going to give Pastor Deb, if you please can unmute
Thank you.
yourself. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Gilbert, what a blessing to hear about Mara. I'm going to look it up. I wanted to speak just quickly on behalf of those who are substance users who are involuntary, like myself, in a nursing home or a rehab 10 years ago after a catastrophic illness. I was told I couldn't leave. They had me tied up to a Dilaudid machine. And it took my son coming in from Cuba to come in. He was on a mission and to unravel me from these drugs. And they all meant well, I'm sure. But to be off those drugs, you become very ill. And I became very ill at home and fell. And there was nobody to say, well, you need to replace these drugs. You see, I was in pain. And I just wanted to say that using things like this cannabis that you talk about, we do have some people here that speak on it because they're not on heroin now. And they've lost people. And I just wanted to say that I think the attitude here is what's changing. It's not shame on you and keep all that under the rug. It's come out and be a human and speak to other humans. And I speak to people about these calls all the time. I just wanted y'all to know that we let recovering people stay here and work. And we have 2 meth users staying here now. And one of them is using cannabis, and he apologizes for it all the time. It's in a little sniffer or something, but I just told him, you're working, you're going to your appointment, you're taking care of your responsibility, and you're not running out to the streets, and we'll keep working on it. But I just wanted to tell you what this means. This is all new. These things in the last few years y'all have done, and this is going to become an empire. I hope it changes the whole state. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Deb. And maybe in the interest of time, we're going to move to announcements, but please keep adding your questions on the chat. We'll go back to some of those questions during our case discussion. So Karen, if you could please show us the announcements. Thank you. The Center for Substance Use Training and Telementoring, CSTAT, offers technical assistance. It's very easy if you need guidance on any aspect related to whether it's cases, contacts to others organizations in the community, distribution of medications for opioid use disorder, organizational challenges, whatever it is related to substance use, please go to our CSTAT website and complete the case form. Once you complete that TA form, someone will get back to you in around 3 days. Thank you. Next slide. We're always looking for case presenters. We know that knowledge happens in real time with real cases. So please bring your case here with us, this space. Send us an email at cstat@utesca.edu. Next, please. If you are seeking CEU credits for today, it's very easy. We're going to be sending a post-session survey after this session, and also we're sharing it with you on the chat as we speak. When you see the question, complete the post-session survey, and it says, are you applying for CEU credits for today's ECA session? Answer yes, and that's all. Your certificate of completion will be sent to you in 2 or 3 weeks after this session. Next, please. And next month, in the same space, we'll have Jason Paulin again with us, discussing peer-run recovery housing and the social model recovery. That's Wednesday, October the 23rd. Thank you, and we'll see you there. And I think now we can move to our case presentation. Karen, if we can start sharing the case form. And Kelly, whenever you're ready, if you can walk us through the case. Thank you.
All right. All right, my name again is Kelly Wilson Olvera, and I am a recovery support peer specialist and the executive assistant here at Center for Recovery and Wellness Resources. We are going to be going over a case presentation for a female who is a part of our RSS program, but also a part of our MOUD program. She is 33. She is white. She's non-Hispanic. So the participant is in recovery from OUD and is stable on buprenorphine. This is her current scenario. She has reunited with her children after CPS involvement. Participant has safe housing and stable employment. Participant stated that success would look like good emotional recovery, working a solid program, financial freedom, relationships that she's been reunited with. Some of the obstacles that she has come to over and barriers that she's really managed to succeed in her recovery is she, of course, has opioid use disorder. She was separated from her kids when she first came in, and that was really hard for her. They were recently removed from her custody. She does have a mental health disorder. She had CPS involvement. She was estranged from her family, although she did have support from the father of her children's family. Her significant other, however, is actively using and was in and out of recovery throughout her journey. And then at the beginning, not communicating due to disclosed information might get her in trouble or reported. So originally when she came to us, she did report her substance use disorder in a mental health facility. At that point, they picked up the phone and called and CPS removed her children. So she was very fearful, really, to communicate with anybody, not knowing that we were just there to support her and we weren't there, to hurt her. Her recovery capital is that she does have family support from her in-laws. She has reliable transportation. She has steady employment. And then she's a member of Center for Recovery and Wellness Resources, which is a recovery community organization. So she has a lot of support within the community. She is an AA member. She's a sponsee and a sponsor at this point. And she does have stable housing. So some of the options that we have discussed going forward is celebrating, right? Recognizing those barriers, and working on a plan of how to overcome them. We've also been discussing legal options that are available to her for permanent reunification with her children. especially as the father is still actively using. And then identifying existing recovery capital. I think that.
Thank you, Kelly.
So I did have. Okay, go ahead. I did have a few questions at the bottom that I did want to address the community to see if they could respond to. Is this the time to say them now?
Yes, actually, we can walk through those questions if you want to read them, so our
Sure.
hub knows what are the areas that you would like to receive some support for.
Sure. So my first question are, what are other resources that are available for women with CPS involvement, or parents really with CPS involvement? This is an important subject, I think, for many parents who have a substance use disorder. What does it look like when they ask for help? And that gap that's there to protect their children and their family while they get support. Also, if there are any approaches that you could suggest for open communication with a participant, particularly who has been reported or it might be fearful of speaking with somebody. And then additionally, are there resources available for parents seeking treatment that won't result in CPS removing their children?
I think Tonya has a suggestion. Tonya, go ahead, please.
Well, I have a quick question. When you're asking about resources related to CPS involvement, does this particular person, is she working with a facility or have an LCDC that she's working with?
She's in our MOUD program, so she has an LCDC through us.
Okay.
So yeah, and that was one of the really awesome things too, is she got to experience clinical and RSS together, and those combined, I think, really supported her recovery.
Okay.
To see both sides.
Wonderful. One of the things I know, because I work directly with Ben Taub, and I deal
Sure.
with in the NAS program, and these are pregnant OUD users who are having their babies and, of course, going to be subject to CPS involvement.
Right.
And so one of the things that's been really helpful with my clients is my active participation as their LCDC, communicating very directly with CPS, getting them to understand, Matt, understand what that looks like. Weekly giving reports of the non-reactive UDSs, what she's doing on a daily basis, who in her family is safe and who's not safe. All of those things come out when you're doing your clinical work with these clients. And I have found that reporting to CPS has been extraordinarily helpful.
Really?
The other thing that's really helpful, believe it or not, is having a good relationship with CPS. I make these folks my friends because they're more likely to really advocate for your client if you have a really good relationship with them. So I found a lot of LCDC reporting, progress reporting, things like that, tapping in with that CPS caseworker, letting them know on a daily basis what's happening with these clients and the growth. And I find that on both the individual as well as that third question about what can parents do who's going to treatment. My suggestion is place your children before you go to treatment.
Okay.
Place your children with grandma or somebody before you go to treatment, because if you go to treatment and those children aren't placed, CPS is going to place them for you.
Got it. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. It does. Thank you so much, Tonya.
Thank you. I see also here in the chat a question. Does CPS offer any parenting classes, or does CPS offer any parenting classes the patient is required to complete? The more the patient shows participation in programs and education, the better it looks on her effort. Does anyone want to say anything about this? Lindsay?
Not about that specifically, though. I know that I have had issues with CPS quite a bit on both three sides of the fence, really. But one of the things that I found was really important for me was when they came in. First of all, that happened. I went to seek mental health treatment, and they came while I was, and I placed my children with their grandparents, and I had we all had that all planned out beforehand, and they still came and took my kids away. One of the things they did, though, is they took my kids away because I was in treatment and didn't know how to advocate for myself, and they made me sign something, right? So I actually, without knowing it, signed my rights away more than they took my kids away, which you don't know what you don't know, right? So I'm always when I'm working with somebody, making sure that they understand their rights and understand what they're signing. And the flip side of that is I advocate with CPS. I used to go around and talk to different CPS locations about like what is CPS for, right? They're not there to find out if a parent is using substances. They're there to find out if a child is being abused or neglected or exploited, right? What is the definition of abuse or neglect? It has nothing to do with substances, right? A parent can be on a substance and still take care of their children just fine. I think that we very often, a lot of professionals will get that confused and don't quite understand that. So I would find myself talking to people about how, like, let's look up exactly what this definition is. Is this parent meeting that definition, or are they taking care of their kids just fine? So that was always a big concern. And then I also work with CPS with the person if they want me to, and I'll go with them to appointments because sometimes they don't hear things, because they're in the thick of it and in that moment that I can help with. I advocate for them and things like that.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask Michelle Hansford, you said something about the parents collaboration groups. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, so several years, a lot of years back, over 10 years ago, so there's a group called the Parent Collaboration Group, the statewide Parent Collaboration Group. And it's birth parents with lived experience have went in and started working actively with the Department of Family and Protective Services around the state of Texas. And each county will have parents that are connected with a CPS partner. And so what they do is they give parent education groups around like what happens while your kid is in our care, what to expect if they don't feel like they're getting the support from their caseworker. They can talk about that. And the parent collaboration group, the birth parents are like advocates for the parents, and so they can come in. They get some judges will court order parents to go to at least 2 parent collaboration group meetings. So that they could kind of understand the legal process too of like what happens while your kid's in our care. So there's a CPS person in that meeting, and then there's bio parents in that meeting as well, to kind of help with some of those issues around what's going on with their CPS case, what they don't understand, what they should be signing, what they've signed, whether they're getting their visits and how to advocate for stuff like that. So we're kind of actively teaching them how to advocate for themselves, what they should and should not be signing, and how to get legal advice on any of that situations that are going on with their CPS case. I know back in the day we used to get a lot of caseworkers that would tell mom that they couldn't get their kid back until either they had a clean drug test. If there was marijuana in their system, they would have to wait for the visits, and all of that started to change a while back. And then, with the OUD, moms were being told that they needed to get off the, medication and stuff. And so a lot of things have changed in that area too, is a lot of CPS workers now understand, that they're working with a doctor and that this is prescribed medication. So I think we're moving in the right direction. We're just not all the way there yet.
Thank you. I see other people have added some websites and resources on the chat. Does anyone wants to say anything about those links and resources we're sharing here? Susan, please go ahead.
I'm thinking I posted a link for it's called Families United, and it was actually started by prior to my role now, I was an executive director of an RCO in Southern Vermont, and one of our recovery coaches had been separated from her children, and she did a lot of work and was reunited with them, and that was wonderful. But she was really frustrated by all the issues that came up and all the barriers. So she formed this group called Families United for other families that were going through it or had been through it. And it was truly a grassroots organization where they did advocacy with local and state legislators. They got providers involved to try to just, you know, say, this is me, I'm a woman in recovery, and here's what that means. And here's how it's so beneficial to have my family back together. And they just did a lot of advocacy and community building and educating. Yeah, that having substance in your life doesn't necessarily, it doesn't make you a bad parent. And so I found I've heard of other stories of things like that, that what can happen in a community by one or two really passionate people is pretty amazing. And here in Vermont, we have most of the recovery organizations have families in recovery programs. And those are programs to help expectant or parenting men and women, mostly women. And often they have DCF involvement. And so those RCOs have strengthened their relationships with those DCF departments to try to, again, create awareness and education and have a less confrontational arrangement. And so that's been really beneficial as well, is that there are ways to really educate people and create awareness and just build on it and go from there. And I had another thought, but it'll come back to me. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Kelly, let's put your case form again on the screen, if that's okay, so we can also talk about the other two questions that you had in your form, and
Sure.
maybe we can get some ideas on that as well.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate everybody's feedback. It's really an important subject to me. I'm a parent myself in recovery. And so, you know, it's important that we kind of bridge that gap and find out how we can better support other parents in recovery as well.
Okay,
I
so
just
in the
wanted to
second,
add, oh, I'm
yes,
sorry.
go ahead.
Oh,
Go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Richard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just wanted to add, we asked for resources and I don't know, hopefully all of you have access to the chat, but there just are tons of resources that people have dropped in the chat. So feel free to scroll through there and download some of those and look at them.
Perfect. Great. So, Kelly, I don't know if you want to read the following two questions to see if we can add this to the conversation as well.
Sure. I think maybe one that we didn't quite touch on is any approaches that you could suggest for open communication with a participant, right? What does that look like when one might be a little fearful to speak, having said something, you know, to a caseworker or somebody else who did report it?
And just a question, now that you mentioned that, what do you think that she's so fearful to speak? Why do you think that is?
Well, originally she did tell me that she wasn't aware that we were really there to help her, right? CPS referred her. And so she was unsure if we're just working closely with CPS and that's the plan. I mean, it would even go to the point where you could ask her how her day was and her answer was always fine. You know, it's good. Instead of ever even admitting if she was sad that day or was having a rough time, she was very fearful originally to divulge any information that might possibly get back to CPS. And early recovery for her. It was very early recovery when she did experience that barrier.
Lindsay, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, so for me it was always being very upfront about exactly what I am like. Look, I'm a mandated reporter. That's what this means, right? And being very clear. That means that if you tell me, you are abusing, and then going and explaining those terms to somebody in very clear, plain language, because they're kind of difficult to understand sometimes. And then, being like, beyond that, anything that you want me to discuss with them, I will, but if you want me to be with you, I will be, but I'm not at all, going to talk behind your back. I'm not ever going to talk to them without you around if you don't want me to, like making it very clear that my job is to be with them and be there for them, and
Right.
what that looks like. I will also say that I think our the other question on the page about places that won't call CPS, right, that is a very difficult question. I think the users union is working on in Texas, like a list of recovery friendly like physicians and things like that, but it's really all up to the doctor and or the nurses that you're working with, and everybody's kind of different, so you have to really know the area and know the people to know that.
Right.
Anyone? Any comments, suggestions, or ideas? Okay, let me read here. There's a comment on the chat from Matthew. Do you want to unmute yourself and share with you your suggestion? Says this is a sticky area because in order to fully help someone, we need them to be able to be honest. Without them being able to feel safe enough to be honest, we really cannot help as much as needed. But absolutely letting them know what you're required to report and what you're not required to report could be helpful. You all agree with that? Richard, anything you want to say about that? Oh, I think we have Timothy. Timothy, can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to unmute myself and come back on the
That's
video.
okay. That's
Um,
okay.
No, so we have it is kind of a sticky situation, and I completely understand her fear. I've had that fear myself where, if I say this, they can report it or they can do whatever. You know what I mean? And that sounds like that's exactly what happened to her. She went for help, got reported, got her kids taken. She's trying to get help to be better for her children. And so where maybe it will give her the time to focus on herself. At the same time, when we get our children taken away, like we have two choices then, and the first choice is not always, okay, get down to it, get my kids back. The first choice is feeling this loss from not having your children. And I know for me, like that was major when it happened to me. So I get why she's scared. I get why she may not come out and talk, you know what I mean? One thing that we have at our organization, which I think is really great, we can talk to CPS, but only if the client gives us permission, written permission. And on our consent and authorization forms, they specify exactly what we can talk about. So, like I have a client now that's involved with CPS, and the only thing she is allowing me to speak about is what I've observed between her relationship with her child. Not her treatment, not her medication, not her diagnosis, absolutely nothing else other than just that. There are some clients I've had before where the only permission they give us is to acknowledge they are a client, and so, and that's it is what it is. We're there for the client. And yes, we do need to cooperate with them fully, and I have no problem with that. But my concern is my client.
And I do, thank you so much, Timothy. And I do just want to briefly touch on the change in her throughout this process. Not only has her quality of life been enhanced, but she is able to share now. I think it was kind of a combination of support. Again, she has an LCDC and she had, a coach. And if one day she didn't feel like she could talk to her counselor, she would go to her coach. And maybe one day she didn't want to talk to her coach, but she felt more comfortable, speaking of this subject with her counselor. The combination of the two for her, I feel like was so therapeutic, and just made her feel like it's okay to open up. And that, recovery support services was so new to her, that this is supportive. We're here to walk with you.
Right.
And I think, she's a person that we're really proud of. She's a participant that we're really impressed with her growth. And even, her journey to getting those children back. She jumped through hoops to ensure she did yeah.
Yeah, and that's a really good thing, and it sounds like she has made leaps and bounds, and that's awesome. And it also shows her kids, look, if something happens, you can come back from it. So that's a really good
Yeah.
thing. But I completely understand, someone just coming in, or when she just came in, and that fear's there. You know, it's absolutely there. Like, I've
Yeah.
been there myself. So yeah, I get it. I completely get it.
And thank you so much. And I know we have some other people in the call who would like to participate. Please don't be discouraged. We'll have plenty of opportunities to talk more about this. Maybe we can have a topic on CPS and substances in the future. Absolutely, why not? I want to thank again our speaker and our case presenter for today's session. And I'm going to briefly give Susie Walker 1 minute to give us a short recap of what happened in the session and some suggestions for the case. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, it was a remarkable presentation from Phil. I really appreciated the ideas about peer positioning. That was a really new approach for me, and I appreciated hearing about that. And then this case, I really appreciate hearing it's such a sensitive area, and if we can't find a way to better resolve the challenges that women are experiencing, the families will continue to suffer, and recovery can continue to be really disrupted by it as well. So I appreciated all the ideas that were shared today about the resources. I'm reading in the chat here all these remarkable programs that are going on, helping people directly through peer programs or advocacy opportunities and different parenting programs. So like all things recovery, I think that tells me there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of energy about coming together to find solutions. And that's all.
Thank you, Susie. And to all of you, please remember to answer your post-session surveys. And as Jasmine put in the chat, feel free to add any suggestions on topics or ideas for coming sessions. It looks like there could be a second part on this conversation, specifically talking about the case. Thank you, Phil Owens, for your great presentation. And I'll see you all next month. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.